With the sticker shock of an $80 Mario Kart, a common refrain I've heard is that this could be ameliorated with free DLC, and that paid DLC would be problematic for Nintendo. Of this, though, I'm not so sure. So let's dive in to the Mario Kart World DLC situation. There is no doubt in my mind that Mario Kart will continue to be supported for a very long time to come. Mario Kart 8 on Wii U released in May 2014, and it had two paid DLC packs following launch, the first one the November after the game launched. Then in April 2017, it was revamped as Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with some extra features but no additional tracks. There were a few odd changes at the time by allowing it to link to the Nintendo Labo and incorporating Breath of the Wild Link into the game, but fundamentally, the most major change was the addition of the Booster Course Pass DLC, which was, of course, packed with the expansion pack tier of NSO. In this way, we can identify three key Nintendo DLC strategies that they've already employed for Mario Kart. Occasional free add-ons, in particular to tie into their recent games, such as bringing the Master Cycle Zero to the lineup of vehicles. Then paid DLC with more substantial and ambitious scopes in the year or so after launch, following Nintendo's usual habit of doing DLC runs in roughly 18-month windows. Obviously, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was longer, but that had two expansions and so was slightly different. And then finally, more extensive DLC, but that is essentially reusing old content, specifically tour tracks and such like. So, that was then. What are we to expect from Mario Kart World now? The title appears to have, at the start, quite a large amount of content, including 28 tracks that we can see, plus almost certainly a final cup including the Rainbow Road, bringing the title up to 32 tracks in total. I have seen speculation that there could be even more besides. There is definitely a lot of room for expansion to bring the number up to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's 96 tracks total over the coming years, and while this seems like a lofty number, I suspect that in the very long term we could see it, though remember, it took Mario Kart 8 practically a decade to get to that point. As for the expectation that the eye-watering $80 price will lead Nintendo to soften the impact by being more generous with its post-launch DLC in terms of free additions, well, I have a separate video in which I've deep-dived these specific considerations around Nintendo's game price choices, but suffice to say, I am unconvinced. It's possible, certainly, but it will depend on the circumstances, so let's explore those. I have talked in some of my initial reaction videos about the way Nintendo appears to be prioritizing the Mario cast. This is great news to those who feared a smash cart approach to the next game, but I would hold off on the party streamers since it seems at least plausible, if not flat out likely, that future DLC will focus on the broader Nintendo universe. Why would that be? Nintendo is in the throes of trying to leverage its core IP in new ways, and so, as it decides to make a big push on different franchises, it would make sense to celebrate this by including DLC packs in the most high-profile series they have. This may be a positive thing for Mario Kart fans, as it makes sense for Nintendo to make the DLC widely accessible. There's no point in having a DLC dedicated to Pikmin in order to promote that franchise to an ever wider audience if only die-hard Pikmin lovers actually buy the thing. Still, there are other complications. Unlike previous Mario Kart games, it is a lot harder to just add in one-off tracks. They can always find a new way to do this, of course, but I think the baseline expectation has to be not just a new track, but a new area of the world being added with new areas to explore between races as well, so that it's an extension of all the modes in the game and not just Grand Prix. This creates obvious difficulties in terms of bringing diverse experiences into a cohesive play experience, but it also opens up tantalizing possibilities. Specifically, I really think we could see the Kingdom of Hyrule in Mario Kart form. Think about it, an 8-track expansion would be more than enough to feature large areas of Hyrule, and the Zelda universe is not just well developed enough for it to have a lot to show for itself, but around 2026 or 2027, which is the likely window for at least one of the DLC packs, they are going to be moving into full-on pre-movie hype. With the mainline Zelda team likely a few years off their next game, they will want a diverse set of experiences to promote Zelda on console. Remakes and ports are great, but they only take you so far. Mario Kart is their premier game experience, and it makes so much sense to me that the world of Hyrule could be added to it. I'm not talking about a few tracks here and there. I'm talking about being able to drive across to Hyrule and race from Hebra to Farron Woods, from Castletown to Death Mountain. The potential of such a game is absolutely vast, especially if it included some of the vehicle building mechanics from Tears of the Kingdom, and there is simply no way that something of that scale could be a free DLC. Now, I think that such a DLC would still be 18 months out, and it still feels likely to me that there will be a DLC pack before even this. It is possible that we won't see this booting up until November, or perhaps even next spring, but sooner or later, I feel it's likely they're going to want something new. One option that they could utilize is the same option they used to take Super Mario World forward all those years ago: Mario Kart Galaxy. By rainbow roading into space, they can have individual asteroids which are far more varied in terms of scope, and the chance for other Nintendo cameos is pretty huge. Metroid, Star Fox, Pikmin, and F-Zero would easily work their way into the spacey aesthetic, while it wouldn't be too difficult to drop in on Inkopolis or Animal Crossing, or something that would really amuse me, Ring Fit Adventure. Imagine overtaking the Ring Fit runners and driving rings round Drago. So, let's say we get two packs in 2026, a Galaxy pack and a Zelda pack. Does this mean that Mario Kart World shuts up shop after this is done? Usually Nintendo is fairly strict with even its biggest franchises in closing the door after the end of a particular period. Smash is a notable exception, but due to Sakurai's huge reputation, it is an exception in so many ways. I think Nintendo will want to pull the plug, if only because they will need ultimately for the team to transition to the next Mario Kart, and given the scale of world, the next one is likely to need to be even more vast, or at least mechanically more innovative, in such a way that it has a fresh appeal to a new audience. If they did a Smash and did a second wave of DLC packs after the first wave, what would they do? Well, if Zelda is capable of getting a vast expansion of its own, are any other franchises possible to follow suit? I think ultimately it is unlikely, although if one were to have a chance, it would probably be Animal Crossing or maybe Splatoon. The trouble is that Animal Crossing makes less fertile ground for multiple tracks, since it is, by its nature, self-contained. Splatoon has more diversity, but Inkopolis feels more like one area. Therefore, my expectation is that if we do see a franchise-specific DLC, it will be Zelda alone, although it would be pretty hilarious if they did decide to give one to Pikmin, which would be a huge expansion of that franchise, and it does have multiple different biomes which could be exploited. However, I think the Booster Course Pass gives us a model for what we are more likely to see. Now, this may sound strange, the Booster Course Pass was cannibalizing tour tracks principally, but there are, I believe, 70 classic tracks that did not make Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and so they should be able to choose 48 for a DLC run at some point. In this case, I expect they won't do anything in terms of the interstitial areas, but will simply have them as one-off races. It's possible, I guess, that if they're redesigning the old courses, they may find ways to build some linking elements so that you can still drive from track to track, but fundamentally, I would expect the courses to come over broadly unchanged. This is not the sort of DLC that Nintendo would need to have in the short term or even the medium term, but it's a great insurance plan for the later stages of the Switch 2's life. The Booster Course Pass surely arrested the excess of people from the Nintendo Switch Online, and indeed enticed them to upgrade to the expansion pack. It also helped ensure a strong rhythm of new content in the later years of Switch. I think there's a chance that Switch 2 could also be on the market for a long time if it takes even longer to make an initial sales dent, and yet the market isn't hungry for new and even pricier tech either. It isn't wise to expect Nintendo to use the exact same tactics for a second time around, and yet a 48-track booster pass might just make so much sense, and is a great way for them to immerse new team members in their development staff on the key Mario Kart mechanics and philosophies before they join the main team for the next game. And Nintendo does sometimes keep to the same rhythms. See the progression of the core Animal Crossing to Happy Home Designer being replicated on Switch, more or less, or the progression of Splatoon to DLC following a similar time frame in Splatoons 2 and 3. What I'm cooling on, though, is the idea of them selling an expansion pass up front. It is clear that it would be badly received by the market at present, but also Nintendo has time with Mario Kart. With Zelda Breath of the Wild, they did push the expansion pass out at launch because they had put a huge investment into this gigantic game when they were at a very low ebb and were anxious to recoup their losses quickly. Zelda had never done numbers anywhere near the kind that Breath of the Wild ultimately achieved, and so their keenness to upsell people as quickly as they possibly could was understandable. But Mario Kart is much more a surefire thing, even if you take into account the difficult financial situations. Whether it can outsell Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, it is still going to be a massive step forward for the franchise, and so they can afford to be patient. I think it's 70% likely, though, that we will have the announcement of DLC before the movie releases, and 50% likely that we'll hear about it when they announce the 40th anniversary plans, probably in a September anniversary-themed Mario Direct. For my deep dive on the developers of Mario Kart EPT9, check out the video on screen right now. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast. Thank you so